Hey everybody, John Peterson here from John Peterson Photography, and I wanted to do a quick follow-up video to my previous video that you can find right up here, where I took my X-T5 to Iceland for my first workshop of 2023. Now this is the first workshop that I've taken this out, the first real test I've been able to give to this camera, and gotta say it worked fantastic. You know, I had a few small quibbles with it. You know, sometimes the exposure compensation dial would move a little bit more freely than I would want, but it's just a matter of retraining myself to use the camera, check my settings before I start shooting, and you know, just basic things. So it's, you know, with any camera, it's not going to be perfect. And I was just a little bit surprised because I've been an XT owner since the very start, and it's just some different nuances to using the X-T5 than what I've been used to for the previous iterations of the camera. But what I wanted to talk to you guys about today was I had a chance to use this at night out photographing the Aurora. Now, I had made a comment in the previous video about a little bit how this camera might be a little bit noisier than the X-T3 that I was previously shooting. And so I wanted to take a look at a few nighttime photographs, specifically of the Aurora, and look at the noise. Now, I'll just kind of cut to the chase for you right now. In terms of night photography, there was no more noticeable noise out of the X-T5 than there was out of the X-T3. Even with the new sensor, new processor, I did not detect any more noise than what I would expect with any other camera doing nighttime photography. Okay, so very happy with how the X-T5 turned out. Great photographs. Great time photographing the Aurora, and if you've never done it, it's a wonderful, wonderful experience to see these amazing lights happening over your head and then capture them on the camera. So let's dive in and take a look at a few images and let me know what you think. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at a few images here in Lightroom. Now, know that most of these images are raw files. So I haven't done a lot of processing to most of the images that we're going to see, but that's okay. I really want to just talk a little bit about using the X-T5 to photograph the Aurora, look at some of the noise that's happening in these images, and we'll go from there. So this first image is kind of the first location that we found. We're looking south towards the Capitol, and so you see a little bit of light haze that's happening off over the mountains. But, you know, as a photographer, once you start photographing the Aurora, you're in awe of the color that's happening over your head, which is great. But then eventually you start turning your mind towards creating a meaningful composition. And one of the ways to do that for the Aurora is to find some foreground, of course, but ones that will reflect the color, so you can add even more color into your image. So if you find a reflective surface that's going to reflect that Aurora color back, you can enhance your overall image that way. So this is the first one. We found this unfrozen stream, and we didn't have the best angle with the water and the Aurora, and we had limited mobility in this one little location, but we did our best to capture the Aurora and have it reflect off the bottom. So again, this is a raw file. This was shot at ISO 3200 ISO at f2.8 for a 20-second exposure. So not bad at all, just looking at it on the screen this way. Next one is kind of from that same location looking another direction. And here I have the stream as a leading line in the composition. And look at the color overhead. I've got greens and I've got reds, which reds are a little bit more rare. And it was just a fantastic display at this moment. You know, and the aurora changes constantly in intensity, direction, and shape. And so it's almost like action photography in the sense that you need to be constantly adjusting your shutter speeds and your composition. You know, because if the aurora is moving really fast, I don't want a super fast shutter speed. But if it's slow, fairly stable, I can go with a longer shutter speed and lower ISO. And the reason I don't want a long shutter speed when it's moving fast is just like any other moving object, it will blur. And I want some definition in my aurora, so I want to capture it as fast as I possibly can. But let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look at some of the noise. And again, this is at ISO 3200, f2.8 for 20 seconds. And this is an acceptable quality of noise for me. I am completely happy with the X-T5 and what it's done for night photography. And this type of noise, it's really easy to clean up, and I'll show you how I do that here in just a second. But we'll look at a couple more images here. You know, another one, I had even more reds and magentas happening overhead. Very little noise, again ISO 3200. Here in this shot, I didn't have a great angle with the water and the aurora, so I just have the aurora's crossing the stream almost perpendicularly, which isn't ideal, but it's better than nothing. And this stream of aurora coming over the mountain was absolutely incredible on this night. And so I did my best to capture it, and it's moving extremely fast. And so for this particular shot, I had ISO 2000 for 15 seconds. So it came out a little bit darker than some of the previous shots, which is okay. I can lighten this up in post. But if I zoom in and look at the noise, again, this is 15 seconds. ISO 2000, you can start to see my star trails, or my stars are starting to trail a little bit on here. So I didn't execute the best, but look at the noise. Very little noise at ISO 2000. Incredible. Another one here, we have some great S-curves happening over the landscape and these pillars that are coming up. Absolutely beautiful. Another one. Now this church, this is an old church further up the road that we found. This was again at ISO 2000, and I found a very nice foreground subject. Now, you know, just like every other photographer, we want to have a great composition for the photograph that also has northern lights in it. So finding things like structures, water, frozen ice, or ice with a little bit of water sheen on top is a great way to have a foreground element to go along with the aurora overhead. But if I zoom in here and look at some of the noise, again, not bad. This is ISO 2000 at 15 seconds. I have fewer trails than in the previous shot that we looked at, but they're still starting to smudge a little bit at 15 seconds. Let's jump into Topaz denoise and see how that works for us. All right, let's go. All right, so here we are in Photoshop. Opened up that same file, and I've zoomed in 200% to look at the noise. So you can see, and this is what I would expect for just about any camera, there is a little bit of noise that's happening here, but that's okay. It's easy to clean up noise. So what I typically do for shots like this is I will run it through Topaz denoise. And so within here, we're just going to use the kind of the standard model and just look at the before and after. It's incredible the difference that it's going to make here. Let this run and think just a little bit. I tell you, these Topaz products, I don't get endorsed from Topaz, but I've used them significantly and love the action that these guys do. So this is without Topaz denoise, and this is with it. I'll zoom back out to full screen. This is without it, and this is with it. So it's cleaned up a lot of the noise and the grunge and the gringe, and allows me a clean palette to do further processing on this image. Okay, now we're back in Lightroom, and I wanted to show you this shot. I'd lost focus just a little bit in moving around locations, but the shape of this Aurora is absolutely amazing with the jagged lines that's happening. And you know, for those of you that are curious how to go out and do this type of photography, really what it takes is being in manual mode, where you can set the shutter speed, the aperture, and I tend to set my ISO myself. Some people go into automatic ISO and let the camera choose the right ISO for the shutter speed and the aperture, but I'll stay in full manual, and I will go into manual focus. And one of the best ways to achieve focus, some people say, you know, set your focus in the hotel room before you go out, and maybe tape the barrel, tape the focusing ring. Taping the ring generally doesn't work, especially when you get out in the cold. The adhesive tends to not stick nearly as much, and it's really easy to knock focus. So what I would recommend is learning to practice getting things in focus while you're out in the dark. Excuse me. And with the X-T5, it's really easy to do. Couple different ways to do this. Number one is zoom in on the camera to a pinpoint of a star. Zoom in as close as you can, and then you can move the focus ring until that star is as sharp as possible. It's one way to do it. It's probably the best way to do it. The other way to do it is to move your focus selector here on the front. If you're in single shot, go to manual focus, go to M. And if you have in your LCD or your EVF down at the bottom, there's a range, a scale showing what distance is in focus. And as you move the focusing ring, a little marker will move along the distance scale. And you can move that marker all the way out to infinity, and there's a good chance that most of your scene is going to be in focus. So learning how to focus in the dark without relying on the camera's autofocus. You're going to have to manually focus things to do this Aurora work, but that's okay. But here's just an example of me missing focus a little bit until I reacquired it. I realized that I was slightly soft, and I reacquired focus by using both of those techniques in the field. And this is a shot at ISO 3200 at 3 seconds, just 3 seconds. The Aurora was moving so fast, I needed to capture some of this definition, so I wanted a faster shutter speed. So there you go. Well, let's take a look at a few more images, and then I will give you my final impressions. All right, so there you have it. There's a little bit of my experience using the Fujifilm X-T5 to photograph the Aurora in Iceland. This is a fantastic camera for night photography. I was really happy with the noise levels, even at higher ISOs. Very manageable levels of noise, and using just Topaz denoise cleaned everything up. You know, because the ergonomics are largely the same as the X-T3 in terms of using this in the dark, it was not a problem at all. I knew where all the buttons and controls were, had constant control over the camera at all times. You know, I did have a headlamp with me, which I recommend if you ever go out at night, have a headlamp. But this headlamp had a red lens or a red light option on it. So using that red light helped preserve my night vision. You know, the only thing to comment on, which is, you know, it's nice to have an electronic viewfinder when doing night photography because you can see the landscape a little bit better. But it also tends to maybe destroy your night vision just a little bit because it's such a bright light that's coming through the EVF. The other tip I'll give you too is turn off your LCD if you can, again, to preserve your night vision. Once you get out there on location, you really don't need to use the headlamp because your eyes will adjust to the light. But this, you know, the X-T5 was a wonderful companion to have along, and the previous comments I made about noise during daylight really doesn't apply here. It's an acceptable and expected level of noise in these nighttime photographs. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more videos, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.